All right, we're going to continue this conversation, but we want to move to the deadly gun violence during the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl celebration. One person was killed and at least 21 other people were injured. Many of them are children in yesterday's gun violence during that celebration. This morning, the sister of Lisa Lopez Galvan confirmed to NBC News she was the one who was shot and killed. Lopez Galvan was the mother of two and a DJ at a Kansas City radio station, which posted a tribute to her online, calling the shooting a senseless act that has taken a beautiful person from her community and from her family. Let's bring in, let's bring in NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter with the very latest on this. Tom, what do you know?
Right. So right now, investigators are trying to determine exactly why this happened yesterday. According to our reporting and from a number of state and federal law enforcement officials that have been briefed on this, there's no indication here, Mika, that there's some sort of a international or national terrorist plot or national security concern. I know people are going to hear that and look at these scenes that we're looking at right now and saying, how could that not be terrifying? But it doesn't appear that this was motivated by any specific ideology or a specific hate crime. Now, the question is, how did this all happen? I think it's interesting that we haven't heard any of the names of the people that are in custody. And one of the reasons that that could be, according to eyewitness testimony and to what people have told us yesterday in the course of reporting on this, is that some of the individuals may be under the age of 18. And of course, that raises challenges when it comes to charging those people. It raises challenges when it comes to naming individuals. And so they're going to have to make some decisions. And Missouri law is a little bit unique in this, making some decisions as to whether or not to potentially charge individuals as adults if, in fact, they are juveniles. So that's something that we'll be following as the day progresses, exactly how this happened. Did these people know each other prior to the shooting? Was this a dispute that arose during the course of the celebration yesterday, or was it not connected to it at all? Obviously, it's near Union Station, so you don't have to have attended this event yesterday to have been there. But I think when you look at it in its totality, it's another event where it has been marred by gun violence. It's been another event where it's been marred by really a horrifying scene. The individuals who have been shot, the kids that were shot, they will never think of an event like that the same. And so this was also an event where you had 800 members of law enforcement, according to the Kansas City Police Department themselves, and members of the state police. So I think it's a situation where we see a heavily secured event where yet still something happened.
So Lisa Lopez Galvan was killed yesterday, confirmed by her sister to us at NBC. She was one of 22 victims. 12 victims were sent to Children's Mercy Hospital. If you're looking for some kind of silver lining, the hospital came out late yesterday afternoon and said all 12 of the victims there are likely to survive and recover fully, right, which we take as a little bit of good news here. So is it fair to say, Tom, then, that according to law enforcement you've talked to, this was not some kind of a targeted attack on the parade, but more likely a dispute between people who possibly were at the parade?
That's what it sounds like at this point. And so whether or not these folks have a history with law enforcement, or whether it was something that arose out of the fact, you know, you've got a celebration, you have alcohol, you have people in tight spaces, did something grow out of that? That's a little bit unclear at this point. And then the age of the individuals who may have been involved, again, that's another bit of a question here this morning. But it does not appear, to your point, Willie, that this was a situation where somebody came there yesterday to attack Chiefs fans or people in Kansas City as part of some specific plot. That there's no indication of that, at least at this juncture of the investigation.
What is more American than a Super Bowl parade? And yet, what is more American than a mass shooting? I mean, that is where we are right now. We did hear from a number of the Chiefs players yesterday. Some took to social media. Some spoke out in interviews. Obviously, their thoughts and prayers are for their city there. Horrified by what happened. Some reports of some players comforting children who were scared by the chaos. Can you just tell us a little more about how this all went down yesterday? I know there's also a report of some onlookers, some bystanders may have tackled one of the assailants. And just remind us also, what are the gun laws in Missouri?
Right. So that's an easy question to answer. The gun laws laws there are pretty loose as far as gun laws go. So the idea of carrying a weapon in public places, it's certainly not prohibited. You can carry concealed weapons in a number of different places, and there's no, I don't think there would have been a prohibition on having a weapon there yesterday. Folks have looked at, on that point, were there magnetometers close to this event? It's near a transit hub. It's near a whole bunch of public places where people are going to be coming and going that have nothing to do with the celebration yesterday. I think it would have been very difficult to enforce a perimeter on that scale, just having covered so many of these events before. And of course, you have a parade, which makes certainly any sort of security checks even more of a challenge. So that's the first thing. As far as how all this went down yesterday, you know, I think the whole event time was 10 or 12 minutes. To your point, you saw people being tackled. We're not showing that video at this point because we're not sure whether or not those individuals were actually involved. You know, somebody could say, oh, there's the shooter, they're running over there, and they run after them, or they could have been involved in a dispute. So I think we want to be a little bit cautious about who we're showing in handcuffs here. And a number of times, you know, police would rather put somebody in handcuffs for 5 or 10 minutes and make sure that that's somebody who's not involved in the shooting than to let somebody go who they're going to have to look for later. So a little bit of caution on that, although police did acknowledge, to your point, Jonathan, that there were people that were chased after, that there was a pursuit at some point. So it is possible that those individuals can be involved. I think it's a big reason why we saw overnight the FBI and the Kansas City Police Department really urging folks to send in as many videos as you have, send in as many images as you have. And I remember from the Boston Marathon bombing, it was the types of images that were sent in from people's cameras that they just kept rolling after the incident that were found on the ground, or cell phone video that really helped make that case. At some point, you're going to want to make a prosecution here.
So, and by the way, Claire McCaskill comes on this show and often talks about how the radicalism in Missouri's gun laws are causing more deaths, and that's obvious. You look at it and you see it, and it's happened. Also, crime has gone down across the country. I think it's remained stubbornly high in Kansas City as far as shootings go. But Tom, I wanted to ask you, on that front, do the police think that this could possibly be gang-related activity? Has that come up?
I think it's just a little too soon to say. I think all those type of things could be looked at. How many of these injured children, are they teenagers? If, in fact, this was a dispute between teenagers, could these individuals have been part of that dispute or have been spending time with their friends? It doesn't make it any less or any less horrible or horrific for them, of course. Right. Or were these kids that were innocent bystanders that were hit as a result of this shooting? It's just too soon to say on all of those fronts. You know, crime has come down, Joe, certainly across the country, certainly in the violent crime, homicide, shooting category, but it's still a continual thing. So I think if you have a 5 or 10% reduction, I know you know this, you still have 90% of the violence that you had before. And I get overnight reports from police departments all up and down the East Coast. I'm looking at Philadelphia's right now, literally at my fingertips. A couple of shootings there last night, a homicide as well. So the violence is still pervasive, and it's still something that was touched on earlier. It's still part of our culture with these incidents, and I can't think of the last time we've gone, you know, without a holiday or a parade or some sort of a large gathering over a period of months where we haven't had something come up. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is something that we are now seeing more and more at these type of events.
We really are, and this time, Mika, it could be more of a random mass shooting than some of the mass shootings we've seen at events that have been planned by people who have serious psychological problems, are trying to make a political point in this case, or are doing it as their last act before suicide. In this case, this looks like this may be more crime, random crime. But yeah, Tom's right. The crime has gone down. It's gone down a good bit in many places, but it's still stubbornly high in Kansas City. And as we know, it's still stubbornly high in Washington, D.C. It's just this Washington is just absolutely ridiculous. The fact that you have a city council, and the fact, and you can take this to the New York City Council, the Washington City Council. You can take this to city councils on the West Coast.
San Francisco.
They live in another world. They really do live in another world than where most of their voters are, in that they continue to pass legislation that gets in the way of police officers doing their job. Crime rates skyrocket. And then people are standing around asking why. In New York City, you've got Eric Adams. It's, of course, an ex-cop who's trying to pass have legislation passed through the city council to make New Yorkers safer. He's just not doing it. That's happening the city level across America. And I don't, especially in a place like Washington, D.C., I just don't understand why.
NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter, thank you very much for your reporting this morning.